Star Wars: The Clone Wars Season 7 was the season that brought closure to many. Consisting of only 12 episodes, the final season of The Clone Wars debuted on Disney Plus 6 years after the conclusion of Season 6. This is the final part of a 7-part video series where I go through each season of The Clone Wars and discuss the many aspects of them. From the characters, to the arcs, to the creators, to the production, I'm gonna cover as much as I can. Because even after the series concluded back in 2020, there is still so much to discuss. If you haven't already, I'd highly recommend checking out the previous 6 parts of this video series where I go through the first 6 seasons of The Clone Wars. But if you're all caught up, let's travel back in time to 2018 and look at the production of the final season of The Clone Wars. The Clone Wars was cancelled all the way back in 2013, and the 6th season aired back in 2014. And as we've spoken about, for a while that was the end of the Clone Wars. The years went on, Star Wars continued to remain in the spotlight, but the dark cloud that was the end of the Clone Wars still remained. Something changed in 2017, however, the announcement of Disney Plus. Disney was looking to create their own streaming service to compete with the likes of Netflix, HBO, Hulu, and others. Of course, instantly fans speculated about how this would impact the Star Wars franchise, but for roughly a year nothing came of it. However, during the 2018 San Diego Comic-Con, everything changed. There was a Clone Wars panel there to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the series. The actors were there, Filoni was there. It was pretty cool. For 55 minutes, they all reflected about how much the series meant to them and what it was like to look back on it. At the end, however, fans were rewarded with the best news ever.
Hello, Master. It's been a while.
I can't watch this without getting chills, man. The Clone Wars was saved and was coming back for a final season. I vividly remember where I was when this news broke. I was working in a parking lot, and my phone blew up because my friends heard the news that the Clone Wars was coming back. All I was doing for the next 4 hours was pacing back and forth thinking of how awesome this was. Now, we did end up having to wait a year and a half to actually watch the season, but it was totally worth the wait. What's interesting to think about when it comes to this unique final season are the reasons why the show was likely brought back. We'd all love to think Disney just loves the fans and wanted to please them, but we know Disney is a business first. There has to be a bigger reason than because it was for the fans. No one involved has ever given concrete reasons why the show was brought back for a season, but given what was going on back in 2018, I'd like to speculate about some of the likely reasons why it was brought back. I would suspect the biggest reason the Clone Wars was brought back was because of the direction of the Mandoverse. Because Disney Plus was now a thing, and the rise of Skywalker was on the horizon, Lucasfilm was likely planning their next phase of Star Wars. That, of course, included The Mandalorian, something Dave Filoni was heavily a part of now that Rebels had concluded. If we look back at what happens during The Mandalorian Season 2, we meet Bo-Katan, who sends Mando on his way to find Ahsoka. Considering The Clone Wars Season 7 came out between the first and second seasons of The Mandalorian, I wouldn't be surprised if they used The Clone Wars as a way to introduce Ahsoka to more casual fans. Yes, The Clone Wars had a massive fan base, but when The Force Awakens came out, so many new fans were brought into the fan base. A good portion of them would watch The Mandalorian and have no clue who Ahsoka was. So reintroducing Ahsoka with the final season of The Clone Wars was Filoni's way of familiarizing her with more fans. It's also important to note that the end of 2020 was when the Ahsoka show was announced. I wouldn't be surprised if Filoni knew fans would go back to watch The Clone Wars, and it would continue to really piss him off that the series was never concluded properly. The launching of Disney Plus was also likely a big reason why. At the time, Lucasfilm had only announced The Mandalorian and Andor. If Disney is going to launch its own streaming service, they're going to need more content than that. As a result, The Clone Wars became an intriguing idea for Disney. They know The Clone Wars had a big fan base, so they could use the final season as a way to get fans to sign up. This last reason is purely speculative speculation, but it's not inconceivable to think a factor for the return of the Clone Wars was the state of the franchise. The Last Jedi had just come out in 2017, and the fanbase was a wreck. Today in 2024, people make fun of Disney all the time. That all started back during the release of The Last Jedi. In May of 2018, Solo came out, and the movie absolutely bombed at the box office. So if you were a Star Wars fan in the summer of 2018, you probably weren't having fun with Star Wars. Lucasfilm had to know that bringing the Clone Wars back would be a big win with the fans. Also, it would convince these fans who hate Disney to sign up for Disney Plus, because as much as they may hate Disney, they probably wanted to see the Clone Wars more. Again, these reasons are all speculative, but if any one of them turned out to be true, I wouldn't be surprised. The other part of the season that's interesting to think about are the arcs that were chosen. As we previously covered, at the time there were 12 unfinished arcs consisting of 52 episodes. Only 3 of those arcs consisting of 12 episodes were revived for the final season. It's a little disappointing that they left arcs such as Son of Dathomir or Dark Disciple on the cutting room floor, or even the Utapau arc, which was mostly completed. Why were the Bad Batch arc, the Ahsoka Walkabout arc, and the Siege of Mandalore chosen to be revived? From the behind-the-scenes featurettes, Filoni gave an answer.
Each story arc in the last 12 episodes gives you an important piece of the end of the war. The clone's perspective, Ahsoka's perspective, and then the finale, which brings both of those two together. Because in the end, the Clone Wars to me is about Ahsoka and Rex.
This was actually quite smart from Filoni. I wouldn't be surprised if Lucasfilm would only give him a budget for 12 episodes, so Filoni had to sit down and choose which arcs made the most sense. The Siege of Mandalore was obvious. That was the ending of the series and needed to be told. The Bad Batch and Ahsoka Walkabout arcs aren't super important arcs and frankly aren't that memorable either, but they do remind us of who the clones are and who Ahsoka is, so Filoni's reasons make sense. There are probably a few more underlying reasons, however. It takes no genius to figure this out, but Filoni probably chose the Bad Batch arc because he wanted it to be a backdoor pilot for a Bad Batch series. We all know the Bad Batch came out shortly after the Clone Wars Season 7, and they absolutely knew that was going to happen when they were making the final Clone Wars season. Would I have loved to have gotten even another 4 episodes? Yeah, but I'm not surprised that these 12 episodes were the ones that were chosen. Before we move on to discussing the story of Season 7, let's look at how the season was affected by the 6-year time gap from Season 6. A lot changed with Star Wars in those 6 years. We had gotten an entire sequel trilogy in that time span, we had gotten 2 spin-off movies, we had gotten an animated show that heavily featured parts of the Clone Wars, and the team's ability to animate had also gotten so much better. The quality in the animation is noticeably better here than when we last saw it. I remember being in awe of how smooth the lightsaber fight between Ahsoka and Maul was. The reason it was so smooth was because Lucasfilm Animation was actually able to use motion capture to create this fight. And for that motion capture, they brought back Ray Park, the original actor of Darth Maul. This shit is awesome. When it comes to the production of the season, however, the most interesting thing to think about is how it relates to Star Wars Rebels. When watching the Clone Wars for the first time, you don't know what's going to happen to any of the new characters, like Ahsoka and Rex. Even Maul, now that he's alive, you don't know what will happen to him either. The Clone Wars ended in Season 6, and their fates were largely left undecided. Then Star Wars Rebels came out. That show told us how Ahsoka survived, it told us how Rex survived, it even told us how Maul survived, and how they were all involved in this Siege of Mandalore. Rebels concluded, and now the final season of the Clone Wars was being told. For anyone who is mildly up to date with Star Wars animation, as great as the Siege of Mandalore is, we all know what's going to happen once Order 66 is executed. Maul escapes, Ahsoka survives, Rex survives and removes his inhibitor chip. But now in 2024, if you were to watch the Clone Wars for the first time, you don't know what's going to happen to these characters in Season 7. In fandoms, people love to discuss release orders in chronological orders, but with Star Wars animation, no one is going to watch the first 6 seasons of the Clone Wars, then Rebels, and then the last season of the Clone Wars. So it puts people who watched Season 7 right when it came out in a unique position. I know I just said people in 2024 watching the Clone Wars for the first time wouldn't know what would happen to these characters, assuming they hadn't watched Rebels yet, but that's not likely true. If you are on Disney Plus and you happen to see the Ahsoka series shown with a middle-aged woman on the cover, you might be inclined to believe that teenager Ahsoka in the Clone Wars lives for a few more decades. Also, if you happen to watch Solo: A Star Wars Story, you will come across Darth Maul, so you know he won't die here either. The point I'm trying to make is that the Siege of Mandalore is a masterclass in storytelling, but realistically the fates of all the characters are spoiled by the dozens of other Star Wars stories. series. So the only way for someone to truly appreciate the Siege of Mandalore is if they're a new fan of the franchise and they lock themselves away from the internet until they watch all 7 seasons of the Clone Wars. And how many of those fans exist? The Clone Wars Season 7 is one of the most unique pieces of Star Wars media, considering how the series was cancelled 7 years before. But as I always say, at the end of the day, it's the story that matters. So let's dive deep into the 12 episodes of the Clone Wars Season 7. I'm gonna break down Season 7 by arc. So the Bad Batch arc, the Ahsoka Walkabout arc, and then the Siege of Mandalore. As Filoni said before, the reason the Bad Batch arc was chosen for Season 7 was because of how it featured the clones. Even though this arc is called the Bad Batch arc, it's mostly about Rex. The beginning of the episode features one of the most touching moments in the series. Rex looks down at a picture of his lost friends, and he and Cody then begin to briefly reflect on the war and how it's hard to be the one that survives. This was the shit that the Clone Wars had consistently done for a few seasons now and continues to do in Season 7. Tackle these themes of war and how awful war really is. The main plotline of this arc is that Rex finds out that his former brother Echo is still alive. After losing so many comrades throughout the entire series, Rex becomes overly emotional at the thought that Echo could be alive. He and the rest of the team embark on a rather risky mission that could easily be a trap, but they end up finding Echo, and they bring him back to base after a bunch of action sequences. I appreciated this arc because for one last time, it highlighted who the clones really are. Filoni, knowing he now gets to tell the Siege of Mandalore, really wants to contrast who the clones are before and after Order 66. In the Bad Batch, we see how much they care for each other and how human they all are. Even the 4 members of the Bad Batch themselves show us how unique the clones can be. There can be defective clones who gain these superhuman traits that none of the other clones have. Showing us this before the heartbreak that is the Siege of Mandalore was wise. The ending of this arc puts the final touches on this message. Echo is now someone who feels lost and feels like he doesn't belong. The average viewer of this season of the Clone Wars was probably much older than the age of the average viewer back in 2010. But Filoni still knows at the end of the day, Star Wars is meant to teach kids life lessons. Showing someone lost in the world is something kids can struggle with. Rex insisting that Echo stays with the Bad Batch was a neat message to end the arc on. Now, what's also interesting to look at with this arc is how it changed from the unfinished arc. The overall plotline is the same, but if you remember, the original arc was not supposed to be a part of the final season. Filoni made a few changes to help tell the audience how close we really are to Revenge of the Sith. The most obvious thing right away is Anakin's hair. We all know that he has much longer hair in Revenge of the Sith, and this arc is the first time we see him with that Revenge of the Sith hair. So without a single word spoken from a character, we know we are getting close to the end of the war. Now, since none of these arcs would focus much on Anakin or Obi-Wan, Filoni wanted to include at least one last scene with Anakin and Padme, and I love this scene. I remember there was speculation that Padme looked a little pregnant here, and Filoni did confirm that was intentional, but it was also really neat showing how dependent Anakin is on Padme for his emotional well-being. This moment doesn't change how we view Revenge of the Sith, but it enhances the overall Star Wars story just a little bit more. Obi-Wan also making that comment about Padme to Anakin was low-key a big deal. Obi-Wan may not know he's married, but he knows something funny is going on there. Overall, the Bad Batch arc was fine. It highlighted the clones nicely, but when looking back at the other clone-focused arcs in the series, it doesn't compare. The next 4 episodes seem to be some of the more hated episodes of the Clone Wars, and that's Ahsoka's adventures with Trace and Rafa. Listen, I get it, these episodes aren't great, but to be honest, I do kinda like them. The Bad Batch arc was fun, but we had seen so many clone-focused episodes that this arc didn't add anything new. With this Ahsoka arc, I thoroughly appreciated seeing ordinary people in the Star Wars galaxy. Yes, we had seen plenty of ordinary people in the Clone Wars, but those episodes always showed ordinary people in immediate threat of danger. Here, Trace and Rafa are ordinary people making their way in the galaxy. They're not about to be attacked, the separatists or bounty hunters aren't invading their planet, they're just doing day-to-day stuff. That's something I enjoyed seeing. Now, the real reason Filoni wanted to have this arc in Season 7 was because of how it changes Ahsoka's worldview. Yes, Ahsoka is frustrated with the Jedi considering what happened to her, but she doesn't know how the ordinary person views the Jedi. Seeing Trace and Rafa vent about the war and the Jedi's role in it were moments that really had me hooked. It's important to challenge Ahsoka's view that the Jedi are this all-good group of people trying to help every ordinary person, because that's not true. The best moment of the arc by far was hearing the story of how Trace and Rafa's parents died. Showing that there was collateral damage from an episode we saw earlier in the series was really smart. This little story alone shows how out of touch the Jedi really are. I felt angry for Trace and Rafa when Rafa told Ahsoka that after her parents died, the Jedi just said that's the will of the Force or whatever. I would lose it if that happened to me. Say what you will about Trace and Rafa, but this one scene alone explaining their parents' death justifies the arc's existence for me. It makes sense now why Ahsoka would go out of her way to help Bo-Katan, because she's reminded of what the Jedi should be and how they should focus more on helping ordinary people. Ahsoka remembering her Jedi training and remembering what a Jedi should be is so important to her arc going forward, in both Rebels and the Ahsoka show, so I fully appreciate this arc. When I was covering the unfinished episodes, if you remember, instead of Trace and Rafa, Ahsoka was going to fall around this dude Nix. This might be a hot take, but I like the change to have Trace and Rafa here instead of Nix. Ashley Eckstein said it was important for Ahsoka to be around girls her age, and I definitely agree with that.
When Ahsoka meets Trace and Rafa, her eyes are truly opened to meet girls her age that have a completely different life experience from her. Truthfully, it kind of rocks her world.
Was this arc great? No, but I don't think it's near the worst of the series. In fact, I quite enjoyed it. Now we can get to the real highlight of the season, the Siege of Mandalore. Right off the bat, you guys need to know I think this is the best arc of the series. In fact, if these 4 episodes were a movie, it would probably be my favorite Star Wars movie. Everything here was brilliant, everything worked, and it was the perfect conclusion to Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Let's begin, shall we? From the very first second, this arc separates it from the rest of the series. Changing the music from the classic Clone Wars theme to the classic Star Wars theme subconsciously tells us this is important. The brilliant thing about this opening is that they include something that will not affect the casual viewer at all, but make the hardcore fans freak out. We have all seen the Order 66 scene from Revenge of the Sith dozens if not hundreds of times. We know where all the Jedi died during that scene. We know Aayla Secura dies on Felucia, and we know that Plo Koon dies on Cato Nemoidia while in his starfighter. So what does this opening do? Shows us Aayla Secura on Felucia and Plo Koon in his starfighter. This tells hardcore fans this arc takes place just before Revenge of the Sith, and the arc completely uses this knowledge to its advantage. The arc is kinda split into 2 parts, the first 2 episodes and the last 2 episodes. The first 2 episodes basically do this. They show us over and over again why we love the Clone Wars, while also reminding us that Revenge of the Sith is on the horizon. The opening battle is pure Star Wars fun. The clones and the Jedi are fighting together, Anakin and Obi-Wan are having fun with each other, Anakin is being his typical self. It's impossible to watch this opening battle and not smile the whole time, but deep down you're also crying because you know what's about to happen. We see how great Anakin is here? Well, he's about to kill children. We see how close Anakin and Obi-Wan are? Well, they're about to fight to the death. We see how awesome the clones are? Well, they're about to become mindless machines and kill all the Jedi. In order for Order 66 to really hit hard, we need to contrast the lows with the highs of the Clone Wars. Show us what we love before you break our hearts. It's a smart way to play with our emotions. Ahsoka inevitably makes her way to a Republic ship, and this repeats what the previous scene did. This sequence shows us how awesome the clones are and how awesome Anakin is. The clones are so awesome and so compassionate that they painted Ahsoka's face on their helmets. I could not think of a bigger sign of loyalty than that. You can't watch this scene and not smile the whole time. But like before, deep down you're crying because you know they're all about to turn on her. Anakin giving Ahsoka her lightsabers back is another touching moment. It shows how close the two of them still are, even after being apart since season 5. The one advantage of Rebels coming out before season 7 is that we know this is the last time the two will see each other until they fight on Malachor, so that's also depressing to think about. The rest of the first episode is just classic Star Wars fun. The whole sequence of Ahsoka jumping from ship to ship fighting the Mandalorians was badass. Now, the other thing these opening 2 episodes do really well is set a countdown timer. A countdown to Order 66. When Obi-Wan rushes in saying Grievous has attacked Coruscant, it tells us where in the timeline we are. We are right before the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. At the start of the second episode, Obi-Wan tells us Count Dooku is dead and that Anakin is spying on the Chancellor. We are updated on where we are in the timeline. The Battle of Coruscant is over, and we are at about the beginning of the second act of Revenge of the Sith. In the beginning of the third episode, we see the classic scene of Mace Windu saying, "I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi. The dark side surrounds the Chancellor." Okay, we are now minutes away from Order 66. We are on the edge of our seats. Throughout these these first 2 episodes, we can't ignore the inevitable. We know Order 66 is going to happen. So these 3 moments showing us where we are in the timeline is a perfect way to build tension. The other part of this arc that perfectly takes advantage of our knowledge of Order 66 is the fight with Maul and Ahsoka. Sam Witwer made a great point about this fight. In all the join me scenes in Star Wars, the bad guy never has a great plan. It's just join me and become evil. With Maul, this is the first time the bad guy is totally correct about everything.
What Clone Wars does, it sets up a join me scene where really the good guy or good girl should say yes, possibly. That was the really fun riff we have there, is that we haven't seen a join me scene where the bad guy actually has the better plan.
Maul keeps on saying the Republic will fall, the Jedi will die, and Skywalker is going to become Sidious's new apprentice. Ahsoka is looking at Maul like he's crazy. She rejects Maul the moment he says they have to stop Anakin because Ahsoka supposedly knows Anakin would never turn to the dark side. Holy shit, man. What a way to break our hearts. Maul is totally right about everything, and Ahsoka doesn't believe him because Anakin could never turn to the dark side. Damn. I know I said this before, but the fight between these two is goddamn gorgeous. It's the best animated fight by a mile, and one of the best fights in the entire saga. So those are the first 2 episodes. The last 2 episodes serve to just crush your soul and your spirit and make you hate your life. Ahsoka and Rex have this moment on the bridge. It's been done like 100 times throughout this series, but this moment was just one last reminder of how awesome the clones are. Ahsoka tells Rex how great he and the clones are and how grateful she is for them. Now, throughout the beginning of this 3rd episode, the music is so ominous. This, along with the scene with the Jedi before, basically tells us Order 66 is going to happen any second now. And of course, the countdown timer hits 0, and we are in the endgame now. Ahsoka can sense what's happening with Anakin. We then see the transmission from Palpatine, and Order 66 has been executed. The little hesitation from Rex is devastating, but it also shows how smart he is. He knows what's going on because of the whole 5 situation, so he's able to quickly help Ahsoka out before he starts firing on her. She gets to the droids, learns about the inhibitor chips, and saves Rex. What Filoni deserves massive credit for is not being carried away with tying into Revenge of the Sith. Of course, this arc coincides with that movie, and references will be made, but once Order 66 happens, that's it. Filoni resisted the urge to show us another Order 66 montage, or showing us more scenes of Anakin and Obi-Wan and the Chancellor. Filoni mentions that this was intentional. Revenge of the Sith already tells a good portion of this story, so we wanted to use this arc from the Clone Wars to focus solely on Rex and Ahsoka.
The film saga tells the story of Anakin Skywalker and his rise and fall and then his redemption. I don't need to tell that story in the Clone Wars. Knowing that, identifying the main characters of the series then are probably Ahsoka and Rex. So there was a responsibility to tell the end of their story and then hand off Anakin and Obi-Wan to their proper conclusion, which is in the film Revenge of the Sith.
So Rex and Ahsoka plan their escape. Ahsoka says she doesn't want to hurt the clones, and Rex loses it. This scene right here, the moment Ahsoka takes off Rex's helmet, is the thematic climax of the entire show. 7 seasons, 133 episodes, it is all built to this moment. A man crying because he just lost all his brothers, and a young girl standing firm in the lessons she has learned. I love that Ahsoka won't intentionally kill any of the clones. It just wouldn't make sense any other way. You can't show Ahsoka for 7 seasons loving these men and then having her easily kill them one by one. So the two plan their escape, and the tension here is suffocating. I wish I could have watched this arc not knowing what would happen in Rebels. During this entire escape, you constantly feel like you can't breathe. Rex and Ahsoka are so overwhelmed, and it doesn't help that the ship is about to crash onto a moon. I really appreciated the little detail that Ahsoka is visibly getting tired. It makes the stress and the overwhelming situation she's in feel much more realistic. The way the episode ends, I think cements it as a masterpiece. I pose a question to you guys. What was the last line of dialogue spoken in the Clone Wars? Do you remember? You probably don't, because there isn't a single line spoken in the last 6 minutes of the episode. And the answer to my question is Rex yelling, "Come on." I've been saying this all series. The beginning of the arc was supposed to be filled with joy, action, and life, but the ending feels empty. There is There's no joy, there is only sadness and tragedy. Seeing the graves of all the clones is soul-crushing. The point of the Clone Wars was that it was all just a game for Palpatine to gain complete power. Everyone who was a part of it was just a piece. We look back at the series with a feeling like it was all for nothing. So many people got hurt and died, all for what? All these battles and arcs we watched? What was the point? The Last Shot symbolizes this the best. Remember how awesome the clones were? Well, now it's just a memory. A graveyard. Seeing the clone helmet makes this whole finale feel so empty. And this is how you should feel about war. Of course, some moments in history needed conflict, but most wars are destructive, they're pointless, and they leave people with pain that will never go away. Filoni captures all of this in just a few minutes. Of course, I can't talk about the ending without mentioning Vader. Anakin spent the whole series around his friends and the people he loved, but now he is all alone, surrounded by death. We just saw this happy and caring Anakin only a few episodes ago, and now he is trapped in this armor. At this moment, I'm getting a feeling that Vader wants to bury Anakin, but he can't help but feel that he regrets everything that happened. The series ends in the most haunting and chilling way, and that is what makes this arc a masterpiece. The first 8 episodes of the season were nothing special, but the last 4 episodes were the best the Clone Wars has to offer. Let's see what the ratings have to say about this final season. Season 7 has a 100% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes with 36 reviews, and it has a 95% audience score. IMDb doesn't give individual scores for seasons, but if you were to average the 12 episodes from Season 7, you would get a score of roughly 8.1 out of 10. This would make Season 7 the highest rated season of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. The highest rated episode of the season according to IMDb was Victory and Death with a 9.9 out of 10, and the lowest rated episode was Dangerous Debt with a 6 out of 10. Fun fact, on IMDb's list of the best episodes of TV, the 4 episodes of The Siege of Mandalore are ranked as the 75th, 26th, 18th, and 7th best episodes of TV ever made. Again, the series finale, according to IMDb, is the 7th best episode of television ever made. That's wild. And that is the Clone Wars Season 7 5 years later. My video series on the Clone Wars is not over yet, however. Later this week, I'm gonna upload each of the 7 parts of this video series into one really long video. At the end of that video, I'm gonna include one more bonus section where I discuss my final thoughts on the entire series. So if you want to see more, stay tuned for that. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to tonight the Claude Squad, and I will see you guys next time.